Well, hey, shout out to all the parents out there raising those wily teenagers. Today, we are going to talk about 3 important principles to keep in mind when it comes to the disciplining piece of parenting teens. Now, we've been going through this series called Parenting Teens. We've explored some really important topics. We explored the fundamental principles of parenting that you really want to help your kids to, as they grow and get older, that they're owning their own morals and their own convictions as they go, right? You're teaching them, you're setting up rules for them, that you hope that eventually as they leave your home, that they're going to take those same convictions with them. And that it's also about helping your teenagers to discover why your rules, why your convictions are important, how those are rooted, hopefully, in biblical principles, and that they go on this discovery where it's not just you're lecturing them and telling them what to do and it's just about the rules, but rather the rules point to the ultimate heart of obedience. We talk about this in so many of our topics on Pursue God. There are some other great resources and topics about really that important piece of shepherding the heart of our children, that it isn't just follow these rules, right? That we really get to the heart of the matter, that we get to the gospel in our parenting, where we can talk to our kids about that we're broken, that we have this sin issue, that Jesus came and paid the price that we owe for our sin and gives us this new heart and new life, that we can live to honor God. So then we read the Bible and find out, what does God want from us? How does he want us to live? He created us, so he knows. So all these things about parenting ultimately are pointing them to their own understanding of who God is, his love for them, what Jesus did for them, and then what it means to live a life to honor him. In the second topic, we discovered how teens' brains are developing and all that goes with that, and I'm sure if you're parenting a teen right now, they're just kind of emotional, they're all over the place, they're important decision-making part of their brain is still in development, so they're going to make rash, dumb decisions. They're going to be irresponsible in ways as they learn and grow and their brain develops. So some of this is you understanding, where your teenager is, some of the limitations they have, and continue to train them to learn, to understand their perspective, right? To get on the same page with them so they trust that your heart is for them, that you're not just critical of them and just irritated by what appears to you to just be immature or sometimes even stupidity. But some of that is just where their brains are and some of the limitations they have in areas that they're trying to grow. And then our third topic in this series is just about how do you love your teenager? I think a lot of times as parents, we just get in this mode of we're just disciplining, we're just angry, we're frustrated, we're angry. And so we don't really connect in meaningful ways with our kids. And it just becomes like the jail warden to the inmates, right? And I think that the problem with that is our teenagers then start to lose confidence that we are for them and not against them, that they just start to shut us out or ignore us because they don't really see how we're for them. So as parents, it's really important that yes, we have our expectations, we have our boundaries, but we also make room for just enjoying time with our teen, learning some of the hobbies that they enjoy and being a part of that with them, and going shopping with your daughter if that's something she loves, or playing a sport with one of your kids, just a way to connect to them, to show them that you love them, that you see them, that you know and understand that they're growing and developing in their own way and learning autonomy and independence. And so you want to get to know their personality and hear their perspective and not just be like, you're the kid, I'm the parent, I tell you what to do, doesn't really matter what you think or say. And so today I just want to end with some important principles because discipline is a part of this journey. And for parents, it's better when we start this and have these principles in place before our kids become teenagers, because it does get harder, but you can still implement these things or have these things in mind as part of your strategy for parenting. Because again, I know that in my own life and as I talk to people, sometimes it can just feel like parenting is the most confusing. You just have no confidence. You don't know what to do, what direction to go. You just feel like there's no user manual for raising teenagers. And so part of getting your footing is, number one, understanding your role as the parent, like we've talked about and have many topics on this in Pursue God, that it really is about raising your kids to, again, own your convictions and come to know Jesus and put their faith in him and live their life to honor him apart even from you. That when they leave your home, that they've been set on this journey and have come to understand the importance of obedience to God and to his way. So we can, we have to have this vision for what parenting is about. And then discipline is a part of just keeping you on track. And again, parents, the goal of discipline is not just for discipline's sake. It's not just to make rules and then, when they break them, it's just an immediate consequence and then that's it. Like, parenting is about training. I mean, we talk about that a lot. Like, raise up your kids in the way they should go, and when they're old, they won't depart from it. Like, the training that we are doing with our kids is an ongoing, everyday thing, and discipline is a part of that. And so that's what we're going to just discover today, are these 3 principles of how you need to strategize how discipline works with your teenagers. Having all these other things that we've learned about in this series going on in the background. And hopefully you've established a trusting relationship with your kids, that they trust that the rules that you put in place, and when the consequences have to come, that you're doing it from a place of love and care and protection, just like God is for us. So we're going to talk about the 3 C's. The first one is that we're clear. So especially with teenagers, to sit down, have that family meeting and say, here are the rules of the road. They're going to be different at 13 than they are at 17. What are our family rules? What is our curfew? What is our rule with social media and, the phone use in the home? Where are our phones at night? What are the chores that are in the home? What are the extracurricular activities or the amount of time you get to spend with friends? Like, really establish clear expectations. Like, this is what we expect as your parents. This is reflective of our values as a family. And here's how that looks. So there's no question, or there's nothing that's unclear, because that's kind of the hardest thing for teenagers. If they feel like the target's always moving, like, just be clear. Like, or for your teenager, be like, why am I getting in trouble for that? I didn't even know that was a rule. So it's better as parents. And again, you need to be having that conversation regularly, like yearly at least, because like I said, it's different for a 13-year-old than when your teenager becomes 17 or 18. So be clear about what are the rules in the home, what are these boundaries that we're putting in place, and why are they there? And again, as we've talked about in some of the other topics here about, learning to love your teenager, like, let them be a part of that conversation. It isn't just you and your husband just sitting down and saying, like, here are the rules and I don't care if you agree with them or not. Like, be ready to explain the why behind it. Be ready to talk about, why is your curfew at 11 and not just whenever you want? Because here's the truth. Here are things that happen after a certain time. There's just nothing productive going on. You can just put yourself in trouble. So this is our boundary for now, for your protection. And as you get older and as you earn our trust that you make good decisions, we can revisit the curfew, right? So be ready to explain the why behind the rules, especially when it comes to things like social media and phone use. Just to be honest, we have so many other topics on Pursue God that talk about, the dangers of social media, the dangers of pornography, and the things that our kids can be exposed to. Like, be honest with your kids about why those rules are in place, because as you put those boundaries on, they're going to learn and understand why they're important, and they're going to give them the strength and the ability as they go along to want to adopt those same boundaries when they leave the home, because they've come to understand. They've heard it from friends that don't have those boundaries in place, the trouble they get into, the angst that they feel, the addiction that they might fall into with things like pornography. So that first C is just about being clear. Okay, now the second C is about consistent. There is nothing worse, and I'm sure parents, you can see this clear as day when our kids are young, like toddler age. If you are not consistent every time, like if you say, no, don't touch the stove, and they go right back over there and touch the stove, if you aren't on top of that every time, then the toddler is completely confused and doesn't really understand the boundary. And honestly, that's what happens with our teenagers. But what teenagers tend to do is they start to learn to manipulate you by realizing, oh, okay, mom or dad has, sometimes depending on their mood or depending on the time of day, they might say no to something. But then another time of day, or if they're in a different kind of mood, they might be willing to say yes. So we don't want to encourage that in our teenagers, to learn to manipulate or to take advantage of a situation. So the way parents do that is to say, no, we're the decision makers on these boundaries, and we're going to be consistent. When you break the rule, there is a consequence for that. And again, that should be part of the conversation that you're having about what the boundaries are, about being clear about those, is being clear what the consequence would be. If you roll in even 2 minutes late on that curfew, here's the consequence. It's, you don't get to go out the following weekend. So be clear about the boundaries and then be consistent. You have to follow through on what you say, or else It just creates confusion. And like I said, it just creates an opportunity for our teenagers to start to develop this understanding that they can manipulate you, and then they could start to manipulate others. So parents, that is, again, that's part of the tireless part of parenting, in my opinion. That's how I felt many times, that there would be times, especially when my kids were young, I'd be like, oh, I wish I could just pretend like I didn't see that just happen because I don't have the energy to have to go follow through on the consequence. But that's not helpful to my kids in the end if I wasn't willing to do that. And I don't want to just have empty threats, because that's not going to work at shaping the character of our kids either. Like, be clear and then be consistent with what the consequences are when those boundaries are violated. And then the last thing is just make sure that it's corrective, right? That when the consequence comes, that it's meaningful, right? That if your kid misses the curfew because they're just, whatever, they just decided that whatever they were doing was more important than your rule, they didn't care if they got caught, then the consequence needs to be loud enough, needs to be important enough to them that it would cause them to think, next time I got to watch the clock. I am not going to be late again because I didn't like what the consequence was before. So just make sure that whatever your consequence is matters, speaks to them. Hebrews 12:11 says, no discipline's enjoyable while it's happening, but it's painful. But afterward, there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained by it, right? So biblically speaking, of course, discipline is not enjoyable. So when we have to bring the consequence as a way to shape and remind our kids the importance of obedience, the importance of doing what you say you're going to do, is that the consequence needs to cost them something, or else they're going to just blow past that. Again, we don't want our kids to just start to weigh out, maybe disobeying is better for me or more fun than what's going to happen. Because I'll just come home and, they'll yell at me and scream and send me to my room, but they'll forget about it the next day, right? That's not training. That's not teaching. That's not developing the character. Like your consequences need to speak to your teenager to remind them, like, I don't want that consequence. So I'm going to choose to be obedient and to follow the rules. And again, even in our corrective discipline, that we're coming from a heart of love and care, that we say to our teenagers, like, listen, I don't like having to be the disciplinarian here, but this is part of my job as your parent, to teach and to train, and discipline is a part of that. So you knew what the boundaries were. You knew what the consequence would be if it was broken. And I told you I'd follow through every time. And so here we are. Again, just teaching your kids, training them as you go. So those are the 3 C's. You're clear as a parent, you're consistent, and the discipline is corrective. And if you can do those things and keep those things in mind, again, with all these other principles, that this is really training your kids' hearts toward wanting to be obedient to the Lord ultimately, that your discipline is about creating a home that is safe, that is stable, that is nurturing, but that your kids also understand there's a consequence for disobedience. And it's not harsh and it's not unloving. It's done in love, and it's done, again, because you've been clear. So everybody's on the same page. And that's how God is with us. He doesn't move the goalpost on us. He doesn't punish us by not being clear. Like, God's word is clear. He's given us the roadmap for life, and he's been clear about, the consequences that come with disobedience. And as parents, we need to set that tone in our home, that here are the rules, here's why we have them. We can adjust them as we go. Like, as your teenager earns your trust and really shows good decision making, then awesome. You can revisit some of those boundaries and say, you know what? We can move that curfew. You could go to this dance with so-and-so or whatever, because I have seen the decision making that you've been displaying, and I'm trusting your heart, and we're moving forward in a healthy way. And that gives your teenagers then some confidence, and that just builds trust, and it leads towards the autonomy that we're in, the independence that we're trying to move them toward once they leave our home. So parents of teenagers, I know it can be exhausting. Keep the 3 C's of discipline in mind. If you haven't listened to all the other topics in the series, make sure to do that. And there's so many other helpful topics on Pursue God that can be helpful to you. I pray for you. I know it can be a tiring time of life, but it can also be so rewarding and a great time just to build friendship and connection with your teenager, as well as holding the line on some of those boundaries that are needed and that's for their good.